I'm going to talk today about a concept within Be More Pirate called the edges of the map. But I want to start with a question to you all. When was the last time you changed your direction in life? And I don't mean, crossing the road. I mean a change in the direction you're going in, either personally or professionally. If you want to put your answers in the chat, feel free, but answer with your gut, what comes to mind, or just write it down for yourself. Curious to see what comes up here. When Yeah, it's often setting up different new businesses. Yeah, great. Love to see this. Brilliant. I've become really interested in this question in the last year or so. And not just when we change direction, but why we do it and how we navigate to get there. I'm guessing that some of you will have heard of this phrase, the map is not the territory, which basically means that what we think life is going to be like is very often not what it's like, right? There is often a big gap between the map that we have to navigate through and what life ends up being. And I think that that gap is widening because the maps that we've been given are becoming increasingly obsolete. They're not necessarily fit for purpose. And by a map, I mean it could be school. School is a map. So is, university. It's a series of steps to get you from point A to point B. And, if you're in the workplace, very often we call our maps strategy documents, right? Again, a plan to get from A to B. But yeah, it's not always what it's cracked up to be. And the reason why people change course in life is often because they realize that there is this gap. And I can remember the moment when I first realized that I had a gap between my maps and my real territory. And I was sat here. This is the British Library in London, sat at the top of the staircase here, staring at the stack of books. And it was an important place for me because I'd written a lot of my university essays here. And when I was at university, I was like wide-eyed and full of excitement for life. And then 10 years later, I returned and all of that excitement had gone. And I was sat there thinking, how did I end up here? Like, what map have I been following to get to a point of feeling pretty miserable in my life? And I realized two things. I first realized that um, the milestones that I had on my map, the feeling of getting there wasn't the feeling that I'd expected. And actually, I didn't really care about the milestones at all. I was much more interested in the feeling of the experience of the journey between them. That was actually much more interesting to me. The milestones, the plot points on the map were actually kind of arbitrary. And as I was trying to figure out how to change course, I was asking myself, if you don't want this destination, what are you lacking? What do you want? And I wrote down one word as a starting point, and it was this one, adventure. I felt like that was what was missing somehow. And then I was like, come on, get real. Life isn't an Indiana Jones film. What do you mean by that? So I wrote down that I wanted more variety, I wanted more spontaneity, I wanted to be challenged, I wanted to meet people who were different to me. Everyone around me seemed to like have the same life. And I had no idea how I would do this, but at least I had an orientation point now. But honestly, I had no idea how quickly everything would change after I found that orientation point. 6 months later, I found myself in a job interview to become a right-hand pirate. And no, it was not getting on a ship. The job, as Jill mentioned earlier, was to work with the author of this book, Be More Pirate. And we had no idea what the job exactly entailed, other than take this book and make it into something that was beyond a book, whether that's a business, a network, a movement. But the premise of the book is essentially create your own map. It is write your own rules. And that is what I've been doing ever since. It came along at the exact right moment. And I got the opportunity to write a second book, which is essentially my new map. And because I've spent 7 years asking thousands now of people, like, what rules do you want to break and why? And what new rules do you want instead? I have come to a deep understanding of how we create the rules for our maps. And I've realized that rules essentially fall into three categories. The first set of rules are the things that you'll always say when anyone asks you about the rules. These are the explicit laws, regulations, policies, basically the stuff that is written down. We know, do not trespass, do not sit in the first class train carriage, whatever, do not speed. That's the easy stuff. The second category of rules is harder, the implicit, unspoken rules, the stuff that is what gels our workplaces together, the assumptions, expectations, and cultural norms that we have, things like the kind of language that we'll use to talk to each other, but we don't always talk about why we're using them or why it's done this way. It's just there. Surfacing that stuff is very interesting work. It can be both very powerful and also create a lot of problems. And then the final set of rules is the internal rules. These are the stuff that only lives in our head and is personal to us. And sometimes we're not even conscious of the rules that we're following. It can be things like, I'm not the kind of person who does this. And quite often other people will not realize that you're following a certain set of rules and they will have a different idea of the rules that you're following. And so a mixture of these three things is what essentially creates the maps that we navigate through life. But what I've realized that is so important and why I'm going in a slightly new direction with this is because knowing all this does not allow you to change it. You cannot think your way into a new map, into a new reality. You have to experience it first. And the experience part comes in to this concept that I started with, which is going to the edges of your map. You have to literally walk into unknown terrain and experience something completely new to teach your body the new rules that you want to follow. Because most of the reason why we're following certain rules is because there is some degree of fear attached to them. So we have to teach our bodies or train our bodies out of that fear through experience. That is the fastest and most effective way I've found to change the map or navigate more effectively. And on the edges of old maps, they would have this phrase here, there'd be dragons, which was essentially a signal that, at the edges, in the dark spaces, you get, of course, the fear of the unknown, but you also get discovery and opportunity and possibility. And that's where we want to go. And so this year, I have been challenging myself to go off the edges of the map. I realized that I was telling lots of groups of people to do this, and I was sporadically doing a few things, but not in a really deep and purposeful way. And so at the beginning of the year, myself and two friends, we brainstormed a list of 100 different ways that we could go off the edges of our own map. As a way to sort of challenge our default behavior, to test our own assumptions, to understand what might be possible for us that we hadn't yet understood, and also to understand the gray areas of life more, to understand where there might be contradictions in our own patterns and habits and thoughts. So we came up with this long list of ways in which we could be more unconventional in our own lives. And I'm going to share a few examples because very quickly we decided that this should be a collaborative project because as we know, and Jill has no doubt said to you many times, we go much further and much faster together. And norms are created and broken socially. So if you do this with other people, it's going to be infinitely more effective. So a flavor of a few of the things that we came up with were these. So we had one category around people and how you interact with people. You could write to 6 people who scare or intimidate you, give a compliment to a stranger, door knock your whole neighborhood if you don't know your neighbors. I mean, I live in London, so I'm guilty of this one. Invite your friends over and don't tidy up beforehand because we can be a bit, perfectionist in how we present ourselves to the world. Forgive someone who's wronged you in person. We had a category on work and technology. Go for a week without your laptop. Send an email to your entire company about something non-work related. See what happens. Delete every meeting in your calendar for a week or a day or a month, whatever fits you. Tell the total truth at work for an entire day. See how that lands. And then there's a whole category on different experiences. So how would it feel to waste a day, do nothing at all that's purposeful, just completely drift around? Can you even do that? Pick a random town on your map and go there and see what it's like. If you're a meat eater, you could kill an animal to eat. That's a bit of an extreme one, but we've got a variety going on here. Walk around for a day as if you cannot read. This is actually something that a woman came up with in one of my workshops because you really see the world through a different light in that if you understand what it's like to be illiterate. And essentially, with all these different experiments, there are two rules I've put in place, or guiding principles, let's say, to make it effective. Exercise no judgment in the rule in the experiments that you pick and the experiments that other people pick. Recognize that risk is an entirely subjective concept. My brave is not going to be your brave because I have a completely different life experience, and the reasons I find things hard are personal to me. This is about challenging your own parameters, going to your own edges, and not, so not trying to do what everyone else is doing. And I don't want to hear, that's not that unconventional. It really is subjective. And then also choose your experiments with care. By that, I mean balance them out. You don't want to be doing loads of things that, are terrifying or cause anxiety. Balance them out, do some that are more playful. This project is as much about bravery, about imagination as it is about bravery. It's about expanding your lens, your horizons, the data that you're gathering to understand what's going on in the world, in your world. So do things that are different, more playful alongside things that are scary. I've even created a more kind of formalized way of going about this experiment, if that is your bag, because I think I was doing these types of things quite randomly, and actually doing it in a more scientific way has helped me to understand the difference between my expectations and reality a lot more. So before I start an experiment, I now go through a series of questions. I have to understand the why. Why am I really picking this experiment? What am I trying to learn or unlearn here? And why do I think it's going to challenge me? And then do a little bit of a rundown of how I feel about it ahead of time. Like, what am I really afraid of, if I'm afraid at all? How unconventional is this for me? Is this really a 10 or a 1? And then the most important thing is, what do I think is going to happen as a result of this? Because I said, like, the reason why we're following certain rules is because we've projected often the past onto the future. We have assumed certain things about the experience. And so I want to know if my expectations are true. Once you've done your experiment, you record what happens afterwards. How were you feeling on the day of the experiment? Check in on your body, like a bit like what we did with Jennifer, like note your emotions, the intensity of them, what's going on. Write down what happened in as much detail as you can. And then check in, like, was it what you expected? Or was it completely different? What did you learn from that? And would you do it again? So I know I'm only got 15 minutes here because I could probably talk about all the different things I've tried, but I just wanted to share one experiment that I've tried to give you a flavor. And the experiment that I tried was genuinely the easiest possible thing I could think of to start, because I can't tell you how long I procrastinated in doing this. And the reason that I've started with this one is because of the procrastination I went through. The first thing that I did was an experiment I've called Be Bored, because I am so busy and distracted as a default in my life that I could not find the time to do nothing. The experiment that I landed upon, in order to disrupt this constant state of like doing everything at once and feeling almost always on the brink of being overwhelmed, was to sit in a hotel room for 3 hours and do absolutely nothing except stare into space. I was allowed to go to the toilet, go get water, and that was it. And 3 hours felt to me excruciating. Like the idea of doing that ahead of time. When I told people that I was doing it, they visibly shuddered. And the interesting thing was that it wasn't excruciating. That was my main learning from this. I thought I would hate every second of it, and I didn't. And the key differentiator, I think, was this is not the way that I'd spent time alone and undistracted before. The only time I'd done this before was when I'd be meditating. And meditation is about quietening your thoughts, trying to sort of dial it down in your brain. And the purpose of this was to let my imagination run wild, to just run with my thoughts, allow what came up to come up. And I found out my brain is really entertaining. And I realized that if I continue to do this regularly, the quality of my thoughts would almost certainly improve. So this is what I will definitely be repeating now that I'm not afraid of the experience of it anymore. Now I've got loads more that I've got a few more that I've already done and a few more in the pipeline. But in the interest of time, there's one more thing that I want to leave you with that I think is important about why I'm doing this. To recognize that the edge is actually what I'd call a threshold or a liminal space. Because when you go to the edges of your map, you've not fully let your version of normal go. You've not let go of your old rules. You're in this testing space where you're sort of veering into the unknown waters to see what it's like. I think of it as like an analogy is like being at sea. You're on a boat, you can still see the shore, but you can also see the horizon. And I think that this is a really interesting space to be in, particularly if you're leading anything, because when you're moving or trying to move people from one paradigm to the next, if you're trying to build a new system, a new way of living, a new way of working, you have to be able to speak the language of where people are and bring them into a new future, which means you're going to have one foot in the old and one foot in the new. And so being comfortable in navigating this liminal threshold space, like being kind of in the unknown, but still understanding where people currently are, is such an important leadership skill. And I'm running two leadership programs at the moment, which is why I'm very much thinking about this and really recognizing the skills that people need to lead us into the coming decades with all the uncertainty and volatility that will no doubt come. So that's why I think doing these tiny experiments will really help to consistently build this skill. So my question for your breakout groups is, of course, going to be this. How can you explore the edges of your map? Thinking about some of the questions and the ideas that I've posed, but maybe coming up with your own based on your life experience. Where do you need to go now? And if you would like to join in this experiment and my project, there's a QR code. That will take you to my website. You can download the full list of all the stuff that I've come up with. You can also, of course, create your own. You can see all the questions that I put in the presentation if you want to use them as a guide. And it's just an open, collaborative project to help people build imagination and courage, which I think are just two essential skills for the next few decades. And I just add, there's a couple more links I want to share before we finish up. Because I said I'm running a couple of leadership programs. If you are interested in doing anything more in depth and getting into this more, I will in the autumn be running a in-person leadership boot camp in Brighton. So if you're this is only for people who are based in Brighton, I'm afraid. If you're based there, then there's a link in the chat for that. It's run with a company called Tech Native. But it's a real kind of career booster. If you want to figure out your next step, if you want to change direction, this will take you through 10 weeks intensive of how to get there. And then I'm also going to start running another leadership course in the autumn, which is a bit of an intensive one. It's 18 months where you'll get a qualification, but it's also all Be More Pirate themed. So you'll get kind of an immersive experience of how to put a pirate lens on leadership. And there's a sign up form if you're interested just in finding out more about that first. And if you want to learn more about this project and what I'm doing, the experiments, just subscribe to my Substack, which I think we'll also put in the chat. Sorry, there's a lot of links, but just in case you want to follow along or find out any more, it's all there.